To Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good evening and welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News, TV and on radio. Tonight, I'll give my views on the race to become our next Prime Minister and why I think the country needs a completely fresh start rather than more of the same. I'll discuss Canada's decision to approve COVID vaccines for 6-month-olds. Plus, I'll be joined by a weather forecasting legend as the UK prepares for what could be its hottest ever day. Run for your lives, everyone. All of that and more coming up, but first an update on the latest news from Tatiana Sanchez.
I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Cabinet Office has chaired an emergency COBRA meeting as the UK could hit a record high temperature of 40 degrees next week. It's after the Met Office issued its first and highest red extreme alert for parts of England on Monday and Tuesday, meaning the hot weather will be a possible threat to life. The UK Health Security Agency has declared a national emergency. Cabinet Minister Kit Malthouse is urging people to avoid unnecessary travel on the 2 hottest days.
It's the second COBRA meeting, and in between the two, obviously, the first red alert, heat alert in the country's history was issued, which meant that things had obviously worsened slightly. We expect the heat to last for 2 days, on Monday and Tuesday, when there's a possibility that records will be broken. But then later in the week, and certainly starting later on Tuesday, cooler air should start to come in from the southwest.
Meanwhile, in Europe, thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes as wildfires sweep across parts of Spain, France and Portugal. More than 1,000 firefighters have been battling fires all week as officials issued health warnings for the heatwave. More than 12,000 residents have been evacuated in southwest of France, with temperatures expected to hit over 40 degrees over the next few days. Now, the final 5 Conservative leadership candidates have faced their first of 3 live televised debates clashing over tax cuts and gender politics. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak defended his economic policies, calling Foreign Secretary Liz Truss's plans a fairy tale. Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch and International Trade Secretary Penny Mordaunt traded words over trans issues. Meanwhile, backbencher Tom Tugendhat said Truss in the Tory party has been collapsing. Well, speaking to GB News earlier, he told us the debate went well.
I thought Rishi was all over the detail. I thought Kemi made her points extremely clearly. I thought it was perfectly clear that Penny knew what she was on about and was explaining her policies and her issues well. And Liz made a very good case for why she was so important in government for the last 10 years. I think, frankly, I think that demonstrates a huge depth of talent in the Conservative Party and why Keir Starmer should be very worried.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak says the Conservative candidates are all on the same side.
I've got enormous respect and admiration for all of my colleagues who are standing to be leader, and it's right that we have passionate debate about these issues. And when this election is over, we have to remember we're all part of the same Conservative team, the same Conservative family, and we're going to come together and serve the British people.
President Joe Biden says the US will remain an active and engaged partner in the Middle East. In his first visit to the region since becoming president, he held a summit with 6 Gulf states, plus Egypt, Jordan and Iraq. He also held talks with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which has drawn criticism in the US. Biden had promised to make Saudi Arabia a pariah on the global stage over the murder of Washington Post journalist and Saudi Arabia critic Jamal Khashoggi in 2018.
The United States is invested in building a positive future in the region in partnership with all of you, and the United States is not going anywhere. This is a table full of problem solvers. There's a lot of good we can do if we do it together. Thank you again for inviting me.
Protesters in Sri Lanka say they're looking forward to a new president to get the country out of its current economic crisis. It's after they stormed President Rajapaksa's home and offices, forcing him to resign and flee to Singapore. Sri Lanka's parliament has started to elect a new president. The country's prime minister, who's also faced calls to resign, is standing in the interim. It's as a shipment of fuel arrived to provide some relief to the crisis-hit nation. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Neil Oliver Live.
The race for the leadership of the Conservative Party is a farce. Like a soap opera, it is no more than another distraction, something to take our minds off what's really important in the world. It's not just a Conservative Party problem, of course. Across the political spectrum, it's the same. A wholesale absence of truth, not their truth, the good old-fashioned truth. They might be describing themselves as rival camps, Tory, Labour, Liberal, but where it matters, they're all on the same page of the same script, written by someone else and delivered to them one page at a time. Whoever ends up with the leading role in number 10 Downing Street this time, they intend for the show to go on week after week and year after year. Old characters will be written out and new characters will fill in the gaps. Years ago, I used to watch the soaps, Coronation Street and EastEnders in particular. I practically grew up watching the ones that were as old or older than me. Then came the day when I started noticing those magazines and the newsagents that carried front-page stories about upcoming plotlines, the carryings on of fictional characters sat alongside actual newspapers, so that a person was invited to think the events on the front page of the one were as real as those on the other. I remember reading as well about how when soap opera characters got married, or when a baby was written into their on-screen lives, some fans would send gifts and cards conveying congratulations. For unknown numbers of viewers, the cast members of Corrie or Emmerdale or whatever were as real as anyone else. It seemed like madness to me, encouraging belief in a fiction. Anyway, for that reason, among others, but mostly because I had more to do, I stopped watching. That was the soaps, of course. More recently, I've realised the drama of Westminster is even less believable. Westminster is a pantomime. I turned off the soaps, and more recently, I've turned off Westminster. Now we've reached that recurrent moment of whipped up and confected high drama in any soap that the writers, journalists among them, evidently really enjoy, like a fire or a plane crash or a murder. It's the leadership race. I watched as much as I could bear of the televised debate the other night, which was about 5 minutes. God help us all, they're not even good actors. I'm prepared to accept that one or two might have their hearts in the right place, or near enough, might honestly still genuinely be labouring under the misapprehension that Parliament is a place where important decisions are made. There are therefore moments of apparent sincerity now and again. For the most part, the rest of them just phoned in their performances. In the manner of a soap opera or a panto, the plot moves on so fast you could break your neck keeping up with it. Most alarming and dispiriting for those of us with any kind of memory of plot lines just past is the way the disaster of the last 2 years has been dismissed as though it never happened. Already we're being offered a rerun, a repeat of an old series, all about 5p cuts on fuel duty and no mention at all of self-inflicted financial Armageddon. Where, I want to know, is the candidate who will stand up and take some responsibility for the collective decision and the disaster that was lockdown? Where is the candidate who will stand up and admit what we all know, what's been acknowledged across the board by economists, medics and a slew of other professionals, that lockdown was the most disastrous public policy decision of modern times? Most importantly of all, where is the candidate who will stand up and promise that while he or she is in number 10, on no account will lockdown or anything remotely like lockdown be inflicted upon the people of these islands? Where is the candidate who will speak out about what matters to the lives of people who live not on a stage or on a set, but in the real world? Where's the candidate who will declare that while she or he is in Downing Street, there will be no compulsory digital IDs or vaccine passports or anything of the sort? Where is the candidate who will vow to protect the existence of real cash as the vital off-ramp and alternative to any digital currency, programmable or otherwise? Where is the candidate who will admit that the injections foisted upon billions of people around the world did not and do not work as advertised, cannot reasonably be described as vaccines because they do not prevent getting or transmitting the illness in question, getting sick with or dying from the illness in question. Where is the candidate who will declare that honest truth? Where is the candidate who will say that while he or she is in office, there will be no mandated medical procedures for any man, woman or child? Where is the candidate who will say that a woman is an adult human female born that way? Where is the candidate who said that all along? Where is the candidate who will say what we all know to be true, that the Green Agenda, Agenda 2030, Net Zero and the rest are the products of crippling stupidity that are already causing misery and that can only cause much, much more misery in the months and years ahead if someone doesn't find the brakes on this runaway train? Where is the candidate who will stand up and say it's summer and that for as long as there have been summers on this planet Earth, there have been some days, even here in these islands, that are uncomfortably hot? Where is the candidate who remembers when the TV weather maps used to have little celebratory suns dotted around them instead of the islands coloured dark red as though on the point of bursting into flames? At the same temperatures, holidaymakers jump on jet planes and head south in hope of finding and enjoying. People's lives and livelihoods are being destroyed, or shortly will be destroyed, unless someone is brave enough to admit that the Emperor is not wearing any clothes. For as long as all the candidates just clap along with the rest of the willfully blind, those that see the obvious and yet refuse to say so, then the cost of lockdown crisis will only deepen until none but the self-defined elite are clear of the rising floodwater. I say that's the least we might hope for, because it's my heartfelt belief that calling out the fiction of our present Parliament is as much as any candidate might do for now. The meaningful decisions are taken elsewhere, by the City of London, by bankers, by the CEOs of planet-spanning corporate entities like Vanguard and BlackRock, by the placemen fronting transnational NGOs, Klaus Schwab and his World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the United Nations. You don't even have to subscribe to the idea of a one-world government to acknowledge that our elected representatives are trumped by the agendas of big business and bigger banks in control of the world's money supply. That our small fry are swimming in water dominated by whales and sharks who tell them what's what is made plain by their use of language. Always the same lines from one leader after another. Great Reset, Build Back Better, rules-based liberal order. The theatrical parallels just keep coming. Soap opera, pantomime, now a chorus line of high-kicking dancers in perfect time. In the real world, the world we're discouraged from watching, farmers are rising in rebellion all across Europe, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Italy, in Poland, and many other places besides. Others are rising in support. The people of those countries, the truckers, the firemen. These are real lives, real fightbacks against real imminent disasters. But we're supposed to look away and to be satisfied instead by watching to see who next warms his or her behind on the seat at the desk in number 10, anxiously opening the email every day that delivers the latest script. Will he or she be written out next? On the other side of the Atlantic is a soap opera that couldn't be broadcast over here until after the watershed. President Joe Biden has to carry a cheat sheet to remind him of the script he can't even remember from moment to moment. He has Ron Burgundy moments. Ron Burgundy, the legendary fictional newsreader from the movie Anchorman, who'll read whatever is on the auto cue, including his minder's instructions about which lines to repeat for emphasis. And then there's the utterly compelling car crash role in the soap opera currently being performed by Biden's own son, Hunter. Not that we're meant to tune into that particular drama. Every day, social media carries clips, apparently culled from that laptop of his, the one we're still not supposed to know about, far less talk about, of a naked Hunter Biden, handgun in hand, or with prostitutes, or counting and weighing rocks of crack cocaine. Every time a clip is circulated, the social media platforms take them down, and then another crops up. And all the while, Hunter is at large, at events in plain view, at which the US media sees him and simply leaves him be. No questions asked either about his dodgy deals in China, Russia and Ukraine. If we've got Downing Street and the only way is Westminster, our cousins stateside seem to have Breaking Baddest. I ask again, where is the candidate who will say that the sickness we need to talk about is the ideology that has infected all of our institutions, our politics, our schools, our universities, our civil service, our judiciary, the whole damned lot? Where's the candidate who will concede that we need to start again with fresh alternatives to those institutions that are beyond fixing? Terminal cases. Here is what's needed. Here is the truth as I see it. The truckers who rose in Canada, the farmers rising in the Netherlands and across Europe, the people of Sri Lanka casting out their president, all of those are simply real people, flesh and blood with real lives, livelihoods, families, hopes and dreams, a sense of their own dignity and sovereignty. Power belongs with the people, with us. What is wrong, and what more and more people are understanding is wrong, is control imposed upon people by corrupt institutions that long ago seized control of the creation of money. The beginning and end of all that's wrong now depends on the people, the real people, regaining that control. This means remembering that governments exist to do what we tell them, not the other way around. We need a government that understands as much and that furthermore takes back control of money, not the fantasy money banks create from nowhere and that doesn't exist anyway until we pay it back with interest. I'm talking about money that represents and is made real by its connection to the real wealth of the nation, its natural assets, and most of all, the creative potential of the people. Here in sovereign Britain, that might be hundreds of trillions of pounds of debt-free money, unsullied by bankers' hands. What we're being told and shown now, we've seen and heard it all before, delivered by better actors and dancers. Surely it's time for the unalloyed truth, no fiction and no pretence, the honest truth delivered from the heart by someone real who properly cares about the people. Surely there are better songs to sing. All of that's my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me as well at GBNews, and I'll try to get to some and as many of your comments later in the show. I'm joined this evening by Emily Carver from the Institute for Economic Affairs and by Benjamin Loughnane, who's a research fellow at the Bow Group. Welcome both. Thank you for making the time. Emily, what do you make of the runners and riders in the leadership race?
I think you have a very good point when you say it seems they're very much singing from the same hymn sheet. I did watch some, not all, like you, of the televised debate on Channel 4 yesterday evening, and it seemed to me the disagreements were relatively minor. I think there's a fear among even these Conservative candidates that they have to fit into a certain Overton window, otherwise it's game over for them. And that's something that we've seen so starkly in the way in which the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, many people don't see a difference. You've got people thinking the Labour Party is the party of low taxes now. Since when was that? But when you look at the Conservative Party, with their, 70-year high tax burden, well, maybe they've got a point. So if you can't trust the Conservatives on the economy any longer, then what can you trust them with? And I do take also the point you made about where was the candidate who spoke up about the lockdown, because, yes, everyone wants to move on and we don't want to keep rehearsing the past. But at the same time, we need to be sure that there is an acknowledgement that things went wrong. And Rishi Sunak can stand up there and look, very corporate, very trustworthy in a way, very smart and clever. But they talk about trust. That was the first question they were asked about, trust. And I'm not sure I can trust, because I don't think that they trust themselves to sell the truth, because it's scary for them, like it is with most people.
Benjamin, do you take my point that it feels as though whoever it is, even if it was Keir Starmer that ended up in Downing Street next, it wouldn't ultimately matter? Because I contend that the decisions that matter are not taken in Westminster anymore.
No, they're not. In fact, it really doesn't matter who the leader is. It might change things in terms of, the rosettes are red instead of blue, and the Labour Party are using their typical talking points. But in terms of actual policy, in terms of what actually happens, nothing's going to change regardless of who becomes leader. And the Conservative Party used to be the party of prosperity, of liberty, of law and order, of low taxation, of enterprise, all of these values, and every single one of those has been eroded over the past few years. There is no liberty. You're told, even when it's a hot day, you can't go out travelling, and when there's some sort of virus, we've got to lock you up in your homes for your own good. What happened to allowing people to use their common sense and look after themselves? When did that idea disappear? what's conservative about the policy making that we've had with respect to these things?
I would say, however disillusioned we feel now, it could be worse. And I would argue that a Labour government, Keir Starmer, has done a very good job at presenting himself as a middle-of-the-road centrist. He's not. He was willing to stand behind Jeremy Corbyn being the leader of our country. And while he might want to, you know, change his image in order to be elected at the next election, I don't think we should be so disillusioned to not think that there's any difference, because there is a difference between the parties.
On that point, everyone now in the contention for leadership stood behind Boris during lockdown, and I'd say that's just as bad, if not worse, than Keir Starmer standing behind Jeremy Corbyn. That policy was so destructive to every aspect of our society, especially to young people, to children who have speech delays and other issues as a result of this. The vast amount of damage done, you know, the cancer, missed cancer screenings and the death, the backlog.
But Jeremy Corbyn was specific to our country,
Indeed, yeah.
Whereas lockdown measures were something that nearly every Western nation used to control this virus. And yes, we were not supportive of such a policy throughout, but I think that Jeremy Corbyn would have been far more of a danger
Absolutely.
to our...
I don't disagree with you.
I only even listed some of the things that I'm worried about. I mean, it's well known that Liz Truss, for example, is a Remainer, you know, and that flies in the face of, obviously, what has been so well rehearsed over months and years, that the largest, most convincing plebiscite in British history, and yet that Remain tag is still there. Rishi Sunak is on record talking about the groundwork already having been laid for programmable digital currencies. And these are issues that they're out there. They should be around those people's necks like albatrosses, and yet all they do is appear on television and talk about things that don't matter in ordinary people's lives.
And it's quite interesting about the digital currencies. I mean, I don't know too much about them, I'm not going to lie. It's not my expertise. But I do know that some people are very excited by the concept of digital currency because they believe that it's going to be freeing in one way or another, which is very bizarre, because I can also see the point that it could allow governments to have incredible control and surveillance of what we do, even more so. But, I mean, unless we're all going to go back to cash, everything's already tracked anyway.
But why aren't people, and why isn't there a candidate standing up for basic privacy? Why ought we to live in a world where every transaction is logged against our names? When did we decide to lose the freedom to transact with privacy?
I almost think when you get to a certain point in politics and at upper echelon of politics, you're regarded as being some sort of loony if you think that we might bring back cash or pay for things in cash. You're seen as backwards. You're like a metric martyr. You know, you're sort of stuck in the past. And there is that slightly snobbish thing about things that actually matter to a lot of real people, the things that they really do care about. And in Westminster, they're regarded as being fringe issues, and it's not respectable to have those opinions. And I do think there is a separation between the country and Westminster.
What you said about the banks and the big corporates having so much impact, this is the problem. We don't live in a free market in this country. We have these so-called free market politicians putting across their policy ideas and their manifestos and so on to get our votes. But you look at things like Davos, you see the corporates working with government in order to create regulations that serve them at the expense of those smaller startups who want to get on. They can't pay for lawyers. They can't pay to be able to handle these types of heavy-handed regulations that the government's already trying to impose. I mean, look at the online safety bill. It looks like that's going to be kicked down the road, at least, hopefully scrapped. But of course, there's the free speech issues that go along with that, but also the impact on small businesses. You know, that's a lot of hurdles. Why would you start a small free speech tech company if you had to comply with such regulations that were there to sort of benefit the Twitters of this world?
And on your point about the free market, Chesterton said that capitalism works when there's more capitalists, not fewer. So the more people there are engaging, owning property and capital, and means of production, etc., the better capitalism is functioning. Having a few multinational conglomerates owning everything is not capitalism, that's cronyism.
Quite so. Moving on, though, after the break, we'll discuss the decision by authorities in Canada to approve the COVID vaccine for children as young as 6 months old. That's babies. See you in 2 minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Canada has approved COVID injections for babies and children aged between 6 months and 5 years. Health Canada, the national drug regulator, last week approved the Moderna injection for the nation's youngest. A spokesman announced that after an independent scientific review of the evidence, the injections were deemed safe and effective at preventing COVID-19 in children. Around 1.7 million babies and preschoolers are now in line for doses a quarter of the strength of that set for adults. Canada's Deputy Chief Public Health Officer said even children who had previously had the infection would benefit from the procedure. To discuss the move, I'm joined by Dr. Amesh Adalja, a specialist in infectious diseases, journalist and commentator Bev Turner, and Dr. Tess Laurie, Director of the Evidence-Based Medical Consultancy. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining me. Dr. Amesh, if I may come to you first, who benefits from giving these injections to children and babies?
Children will benefit from being vaccinated, especially if they have any high-risk conditions, such as asthma, immunocompromise, because we know if you look in the United States, where we've had vaccination approved down to 6 months for several weeks before Canada approved, we know that there are 45,000 hospitalizations during this pandemic. And we vaccinate in the United States against diseases like chickenpox, like rotavirus in this age group. And when you look at the benefit, it's very much on par with chickenpox vaccines, rotavirus vaccines, and clearly there have been children that are immunocompromised that really will benefit from being protected against infection.
Where is the evidence that proves or shows beyond doubt that a 6-month-old or a 5-year-old or anyone in between needs the injections? Aren't human beings in that age group at a negligible, almost non-existent risk from the virus?
It is definitely true that children under the age of 5 are very low risk for severe disease. But if you look at the US data, we've had 45,000 hospitalizations in that age group. And the vaccine, especially the data with the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine has less, we have both of those approved in the United States for children less than 5 years of age. The data for the Moderna vaccine does show comparable antibody levels that would protect you against infection. And there are children in that age group that will benefit. Many may not think of COVID-19 or may not have a bad case of COVID-19, but there are children in that group that have. And you have to think about pediatric vaccine in general. We do vaccinate children against many diseases for which the risk is actually low to them. As I said, chickenpox, rotavirus, meningitis, COVID vaccines are no different than those in this age group. So I'm not sure why there is so much controversy over this, but not so much controversy over chickenpox vaccines.
Well, I would say, for one thing, here on this show, myself and others have previously quoted figures from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation here in the UK, showing that it would take 2 million children, each receiving 2 injections, to keep one person out of intensive care. Now, in Canada, there's not even enough, there's 1.7 million, there's not even enough babies and children to reach that threshold where having injected them all twice or more might keep one person out of hospital. It's orders of magnitude below, I would say, the kind of risk-benefit that would previously have been associated with other vaccinations for other conditions.
I don't necessarily think it is if you look at chickenpox, for example, in terms of the number of vaccinations needed to prevent one child from becoming hospitalized. We have less hospitalizations for chickenpox in the United States than we did for COVID-19 in that age group. And again, I think when you look at that number, yes, it's true. It takes a lot of vaccines to prevent one hospitalization in a young age group. But remember, within that, you're looking at it as a whole. Remember, there are children that are under the age of 5 that have asthma, that have had a bone marrow transplant, that have had a heart transplant, that will clearly benefit. This is not a mandate in the United States or Canada for this vaccine, and it shouldn't be a mandate. But there are clearly children that will benefit, and I think you have to recognize that. Not every child will benefit the same from this vaccine, and there is a different risk-benefit calculation that you have to put into place. But on balance, I think that this is a comparable vaccine to other childhood immunizations that we give in the United States.
Dr. Tess-Laurie, if I can come to you, could you evaluate for us what you regard as the risk versus the benefit of giving children and babies this procedure?
Yes,
against what we've just heard.
I can assure Dr. Adalja that this vaccine is not like other childhood vaccinations and cannot be considered in the same light. This vaccine is extremely dangerous. It is not safe and effective, and it's potentially fatal. So the evidence does not support its use in children, in babies, in pregnant women, and actually in anybody at this stage, because we have seen the data emerging on the pharmacovigilance databases, and the official data do not support the use of these genetic vaccines. And if I can just remind you how they work, they do not work the same way as other vaccines. It is a new technology that has not even sufficiently passed animal studies on safety. And yet we have rolled them out to billions of people around the world. These new vaccines give our bodies a recipe to make spike protein, a foreign protein, a viral protein with no off switch for an indefinite period of time. This vaccine does not stay in the shoulder muscle. It circulates around the body and gives our cells a recipe to make spike protein that then causes an inflammatory reaction throughout the body for an indefinite period. The pharmaceutical companies have not disclosed all the ingredients in these vaccines. And we know from independent scientists with no conflicts of interest that there are many undeclared contents, including graphene compounds and metallic objects. And these need to be revealed and disclosed by the pharmaceutical company before we give these injections to anybody else, especially our children.
Dr. Amish Adalja, how do you respond to that? To my unscientific, non-medically trained ears, that's a fairly damning account of these therapies that are being offered to children.
It's a damning account, but it's completely detached from reality, detached from evidence. So basically what you've heard are a bunch of arbitrary assertions that are cognitively meaningless. Because when you look at the data from actual sources that are vetted, you don't find any of what the prior speaker said to be actually true. You can look with your own eyes in terms of the power of these vaccines to prevent severe disease, hospitalization, and death. You can see, I just came from the hospital. I was rounding at the hospital today. taking care of COVID patients. I know what the power of this vaccine is. And the fact that it is an mRNA vaccine, the fact that it is using innovative technology, that is a feature, not a bug. We've been advocating mRNA vaccines be used in emerging infectious disease and pandemic preparedness because of their speed, their agility to be able to be made and to be refined. And the fact is, this doesn't cause a persistence of the spike protein. mRNA is degraded very rapidly. Most of what she said has been debunked by multiple studies. But when you're in these types of forums, it's very hard to be able to give a complete case for all of it. And it sounds reasonable when she says it, but it's completely detached from the evidence that we have in front of our eyes, the evidence that's been published in multiple medical journals, and the evidence in our hospitals. And I think that this is just a dangerous methodology of thinking that you're seeing exhibited.
Dr. Laurie, Bev Turner, I will come to you, but Dr. Tess Laurie, I have to let you respond to those statements.
Thanks very much. It really seems like Dr. Dolge is not looking at the evidence on the databases because the clinical trials were interrupted. They have never been completed. So the only data and certainly safety data is something that takes many years to accumulate. We do not have safety data on these vaccines. We do not have long-term safety data, and it's a new technology. So Dr. Adelja obviously has not looked at the VAERS database or the World Health Organization's database, on which there are 4 million reports of adverse reactions. And on our UK database, there are 500,000 reports of adverse reactions. So 500,000, 500,000 people in the UK have reported reactions to their vaccine. And if we take 50 million, that's 1 in 100, and we know these data are underreported. So Dr. Adelja is using anecdotal evidence from his hospital experience, and we know that many of those hospital cases are just cases with COVID because they've been tested as PCR. They're not people with COVID as an illness, with COVID disease. And what we are seeing on the Canadian COVID Care Alliance's data, they've analyzed their data, and we are looking at data. Jessica Rose has been, many independent scientists are looking at the data, and it's clear that in actual fact, there are more cases of COVID with COVID vaccination, particularly with a booster, and there are more COVID deaths. So these vaccines must be stopped, and the World Council for Health issued a report last month to say that there is sufficient evidence of a significant safety signal on the databases, and these products should be recalled.
Bev Turner, this is a story that you've been following closely in the UK for months, if not for years now. How do you react to the news from Canada?
Well, for a start, Tess is 100% right, and our friend from America is 100% wrong. I'm involved in this because, along with a group of lawyers in the UK, we filed for a judicial review in September 21 when the government started talking about injecting the under 18s. And it was so obvious that this was a disease which was affecting the very elderly, the very vulnerable, and there was no clinical need for a healthy teenager to be given a trial mRNA drug. And as the doctor just said, we have been trying to get mRNAs used for years. That's true. And there's a reason why they weren't given the green light until COVID happened, because suddenly they've been pushed through under the auspices of this emergency from which children need rescuing, under this emergency use authorization. I would just ask any parents watching this, do you feel that your children are in the middle of a COVID emergency from which they need to take a risk by taking a drug with what we now know are demonstrable harms attached to it for a disease from which they are not at any risk whatsoever? That is the crux of this. And as part of that legal case that I've been involved in, what we've struggled to get, Neil, is transparency. We have struggled to get clarity from the government. We are still at it a year later. We are filing every time another age group gets lower and lower and lower. We have not yet greenlit 6 months to 5 years in this country, but they will do so. They will do so. And, the JCVI here said we can't decide whether we can't greenlight this. And so they kicked it over to the chief medical officers, who said we're going to give this to children for their mental health, because they said they won't miss school because they won't miss school from COVID. What they didn't do in February, which they actually did last September, because we made them in court, they then had to measure that against any days of school that might be missed from an adverse reaction from the drug. And it is clear and it is patently obvious to see, even in Pfizer's own original underpowered trial of 1,131 children, which is nothing. The number of adverse reactions amongst those children, I'm not talking about the serious cases of myocarditis, we're not talking about severe incidents, even just the cases of vomiting and diarrhea and temperatures. It was so obvious from Pfizer's own trials that children would miss school because of having the vaccines. So the argument is completely flaky. And the other thing, the most important thing, we have no long-term data. We do not know. Long-term data with the effects of mRNA and the spike protein, as Tess has beautifully explained, that may not matter when you're 77. It really matters when you're 7, and it really matters when you are 7 months of age. And there are too many questions which remain unanswered at this stage.
Dr. Adalja, it is the case, isn't it, in America, apart from anything else, once the vaccine, once that treatment is approved for the youngest, for babies, once it's been deemed appropriate and safe for all, then the sword of Damocles of consequences for hurt caused is taken away from over the heads of the pharmaceutical companies. So there is, isn't there, a very straightforward reason for the pharmaceutical companies wanting to get their product into babies?
The straightforward reason is that they want to offer a product, they want to protect those children that will benefit from it. I think that your other guest would
But Big
rather have
Pharma
it
will
be
benefit
illegal.
from getting it into babies, will it not?
Who will benefit?
Big Pharma will benefit because they will not be held accountable. They will be the possibility of them being held to account for damage caused is taken away once nation states have accepted that the product can be put into the youngest and the oldest.
Big Pharma should benefit. They've actually created an innovative product. Science has delivered something that has saved hundreds of thousands of lives and will save millions of lives. So of course, I think Big Pharma should profit from their inventions and the scientists that developed this life-saving technology. I also think that, yes, there are liability concerns that companies had to think about. And what happened was the federal government basically drafted these companies into making this vaccine, and there were liability concerns that were handled by the U.S. government. Anytime there's an emergency use authorization, anytime the government is asking pharmaceutical companies to make something in a national emergency, they do indemnify them, and they have alternative ways to compensate people who may be injured, that rare number of people that have provable injuries from the vaccines. We have a compensation system in the United States. We have vaccine courts that can handle this. But you have to recognize that companies wouldn't even get engaged in vaccines if there was this threat of litigation that was always held over them. And we know that there's been a lot of non-objectivity when it comes to vaccine verdicts, for example, against the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine early on. So I think that this is a recognizable need that these pharmaceutical companies wanted and asked for, and I think it's completely legitimate based on the product that they're offering and the mechanism by which it's being offered, where they're being pulled into this and incentivized by the government to do so. So if they're going to be incentivized by the government to do so, I think that the government then needs to have some assurity that they're not going to be held liable for what the government has basically almost compelled them in certain situations to do by the invocation of the Defense Production Act in the US, for example.
Bev Turner, a last question to you. Does this make it seem more likely that similar steps, similar judgments will be made here in Britain?
Do you mean in terms of judgments to go to lower and lower age groups?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already there. One of the things that we've done in our legal cases, we've demanded transparency, which they are very reluctant to give. A lot of the time for our questions, the government literally come back and say no comment on the legal paperwork that we send a list of questions in our discovery process, and they just say no comment. We're not answering it. And I don't think that's good enough. That's not good enough to give my children an injection. That's not good enough. And what we're seeing now in the JCVI minutes of the last meeting, they are already considering vaccinating the under fives. They will. And so it's going to actually just be up to individual parents to do a proper risk-benefit analysis and decide whether that healthy child is worth taking the risks. We are only now starting to see reduced sperm motility signs. We're looking at the menstrual problems in women. 42% of women now reporting heavier bleeding with their periods after they've had the injection, and we don't know why. And so if your child's fertility is ever going to be important to them, don't give them this jab. It's too much, too high risk. It's not worth it at the moment. It is not worth the risk. And so, you know, all credit to Dr. Tess Lawrie, all credit to the doctors. I'm just a journalist and a mum of three who's working to give as much profile as
I will say, I think we simply don't know enough. But in the meantime, I have to move on. Dr. Amish Adalja, Bev Turner and Dr. Tess Lawrie, thank you so much for your time this evening. Thank you. Another break is upon us. After that break, we will talk about transhumanism, as a firm offers people the chance to have their bank card details implanted in their hands. See you shortly.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. As promised, some response to the show so far. Peter says, I love your monologue and agree with 90+%, but the vaccine has surely prevented serious illness and reduced hospitalisations and deaths. I don't think it was ever expected to prevent catching and transmitting the disease. I would definitely say I think that is how vaccines are normally sold, that you will not catch and you will not transmit. Stephen says, why should I listen to your opinion of last night's leadership broadcast on Channel 4 after you told us you only bothered to listen for 5 minutes? I was only commenting on the 5 minutes that I watched. I agree with every word you said, says Elizabeth, but it's a sad thought that when will anybody ever listen? For me, we're on a hiding to nothing where the loser is always the ordinary working person and not those in power or those with enough money. Good comments there. Living among us, though admittedly few in number so far, are those who have had their bank card details implanted in their hands. The hand bearing the chip, around the size of a grain of rice, can theoretically at least be waved over a scanner to make a contactless payment without the need of a phone or indeed a card. Those are the pioneers of what's called transhumanism, a movement to mix flesh and blood with technology. Elsewhere are companies developing biometric payment solutions using an individual's physical characteristics, fingerprints, facial recognition, scans of eyes, that kind of thing, as unique proof of identity. Love or loathe the idea, transhumanism is here to stay. This is a story I've covered before, but I'll admit I am a little bit obsessed by the idea. Joining me now to discuss the implications, along with my panel, is Gary Prince, Chief Strategy Officer of software company Simply Pay Me. Good evening, Gary. Thank you for being with me.
Evening, Neil. No problem.
Are you hearing me?
Evening. Yes, I'm hearing you fine.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Gary, what do you make, basically, of chips, microchips under the skin and the rest?
For me, it's quite interesting, really. My view is, if this is the answer, what is the question? What problem is it trying to solve? It's just a technology that people have created. But what is really the question? It's really answering, because, yes, theoretically, wouldn't it be great if this could happen? And it reminds me very much of the science fiction films of the 50s and 60s, where you'd have this sort of thing going on. But in reality, payments exist today. There are payment methods already today. So what is the real benefit to do this, and what really is it trying to solve? Because I can think of it. It's a real happy path solution that's been created. Chip under the skin. You transmit a payment. You tap it. Fine, fantastic. But what happens if, for example, it's over the contactless limit? What do you do then? What happens if, with what we've had since PSD2 came in, the new regulations, that every fifth contactless transaction, or if they go up to a certain limit and go over that limit, you need to enter your card in because for the chip to be read and enter the PIN. How does that happen? And even as I've written about this as well already, what happens at an ATM if you want to get cash out? Because you can't, you have to slide your hand into the ATM machine because there's no contactless way of reading the chip. And even if you go, even if you go into a bank branch, they ask you to put your card in the machine and enter your PIN to read the card. So it's almost a happy path solution is, yeah, okay, it could be done, but then there's a whole multitude of other questions that need answering.
Presumably,
to make it viable.
Presumably, I think it's that there is no intention for there to be cash. The intention that would run parallel quietly alongside an idea like this is that there wouldn't be any cash. But I think more fundamentally than that, Gary, what preoccupies me is the surrendering of privacy. What's in it for me if invisible corporations and whoever else has access to the data is able to track every transaction that I make? Why should that be someone else's business? What do I get from that? Where's the quid pro quo for me?
No, Neil, absolutely. And this is really the thing, is almost, the payment industry does this an awful lot, where technology is created and it's offered out to the customers, and we're really, it's almost the industry should be looking inwards to say, what's in this for the customer? Great, it's a technology that can be used, but what is the benefit to the user of this? Now, you've got, if the chip had things like your identity, because again, we've all seen the films where, and it's been discussed, of carrying your medical records with you, so if anything happened, it could be scanned and immediately available. But that then again opens a whole nother raft of challenges of security and how's that managed. And so this is for me, this comes back to a really, it's almost cutting edge technological solution. Yes, it's fantastic, great idea, but in reality, how would it work? And then even if there was mass adoption and people were interested, with the cost of the chips, the cost of the solution, how then would it be? How would they be massively rolled out to the customers? Because there's almost there's 90 odd million debit cards in the UK. How are you going to insert 90 odd million chips into people's hands? Even a theoretical example, you've got a couple, they've got a joint bank account, and but they've also got their own bank account as well. What, do they have a chip in each hand? how is that going to work? It's almost it's a nice idea, created, if you like, by scientists and techies, and there'll probably be an award for it. But will it ever see the light of day? In a few years ago, the Nationwide Building Society, in their head office in Swindon, have got an iris scanning ATM. So you go up to it, you scan your eye, obviously your eye, and you can it knows it's you, and you can withdraw money. I still think that's the only one in existence. So it's just a technology-led solution rather than being a practicality of where it's going. And yes, people that have got agendas want to try and push it, but will it happen? I think I'd be surprised that if in our lifetime we see it as a reality, as a solution rolled out, because of the questions that need answering.
I think you raise a lot of good points there. I think the fundamental problem for me, Gary, is I'm well aware, and have been for a while, that my phone is essentially a tracking device with phone capabilities. And as often as I can, I leave it at home when I go out. But obviously, clearly the problem is if you've got something implanted in your hand, you can't leave your hand in a drawer and go out for a walk. That's the hesitation that I retain. Gary, I'm pushed for time this evening. I will happily have more of this conversation with you another time. Thank you for your contribution so far, though.
Pleasure.
After the break, we'll meet this week's Great Briton, a man who's trying to clean up the country's beaches on an 11,000-mile journey around Britain's coastline.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. My Great Britain this week is an environmental campaigner known as the Coastline Runner. Luke Douglas-Hume's ongoing campaign is to run around the coastline of the UK collecting plastic rubbish as he goes, and so highlighting how much goes into the sea every year. Also the founder of Clear Public Space, who want to create a future without rubbish. He long ago decided to stop just talking about pollution and to get up and do something about it. Luke joins me now. Good evening, Luke. It's quite a challenge running coastline. I happen to know that it's, 11, 12,000 miles, depending on how fiddly you make the measurement. How much have you covered and how much to go?
What we're doing is separating it into different chapters, each chapter being a local authority. And I've done 3 local authorities so far, and that's Norfolk, Lincolnshire and East Riding, and the next will be Yorkshire. And that is really how we're doing it, because then we advise the county and borough and parish councils on how to reduce the shoreline plastic that we uncover.
How much plastic is going into the sea? I mean, I've been watching this story for a long time, and then of course COVID happened, and suddenly it was plasticised masks and all the rest of it that was suddenly there in the sea as well. How much waste goes into the water?
I could harass you with terrible figures, but millions and millions of tonnes per year. Not just goes into our environment, but specifically into the oceans.
How does it make its way? If someone drops something on the street or plastic goes into a bin, how does it find its way into the ocean?
Well, what I've uncovered or observed as we've been running is that the amount of unnecessary littering is mind-blowing. And that's from cigarette butts to things like this, of a dog waste bag. People go through the effort of collecting the dog waste into their bag, and then when no one's looking, they just chuck it behind the sand dunes. And this is a behaviour that A, is unacceptable, but B, can be so easily changed and reduced. And that's why we're speaking with councils and the Crown Estate about how to prevent this from happening.
Are we getting worse? Are we dumping more plastic and more waste into the sea, or less as the years go on?
All the figures, all the data show that in the next 30 years it's going to double, in fact. And so the trajectory is not good. And so people say, oh, you're blowing against the wind, etc., etc. But I believe that if one small change can grow and grow and grow, so people become aware that this is a problem that they can do something about. And earlier you were talking and questioning about about the climate so-called emergency that we're in, but this is something that individually all of us can do something about. Stop the plasticization of our oceans.
It means that we're ingesting plastic, doesn't it, ultimately?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's horror. So even if you don't, if you don't contemplate the harm that you're doing to sea animals and biodiversity and the farmers, let's say in Norfolk, eating plastic and getting full and starving, even if you're not worrying about that, you might consider and then begin worrying that microplastics are now in our blood. And so the Centre of International Law say that plastics from their extraction, from their use and their disposal pose a risk to health. And not just our health, but every life form on the planet. And so if everyone was aware of that, if you have the time and ability, wouldn't you want to do something about that?
Emily, this is an issue really we could and should all get behind. I think about the dog waste argument. I think about all the time people putting waste in bags and then throwing the bags into the bushes.
Nice. But it's interesting though, isn't it? Because we hear our politicians and we hear young people and activists and so on in schools all talking about climate change, essentially the things that they don't have the power to really change. Whereas these small things everyone can do. Don't leave your dog litter on the floor in a plastic bag. Don't throw a water bottle just down on the street. Don't put cigarette butts everywhere. That's the little changes that actually we have the control to do.
Benjamin, I watched the Glastonbury coverage, and I know that that hellscape that was left behind, and I know that machinery moves in to collect all of that. However, what kind of attitude is that about the people who attended Glastonbury, who walked away from that kind of mess, leaving it in their wake for somebody else to tidy?
Yeah, it's not just Glastonbury either. After every Extinction Rebellion protest, you find they leave, they do these huge things. They all get together in Trafalgar Square or whatever, or try and block traffic. They leave behind all this waste, this plastic waste, packaging, because they have a little picnic, and they leave all their rubbish behind. So the hypocrisy is what gets me. People always bang on about the environment and wanting to save it, but when it comes down to the things that they actually, as Emily said, that they actually can do themselves, they don't do it.
Signs of hope, Luke?
Yes.
Leave us on a high note.
Signs of hope are all the local councils and mayors that I've met along the way have all got really, really strong ideas about improving it. And signs of hope, let's say, this would be an unusual thing for you, Neil. The signs of hope come from Skegness. How about that? Skegness.
I love Skegness.
Skegness, the local aquarium, gives free admission to people who have cleaned up plastic from the beach. Now, that is precisely how the behaviour changes. People see the benefit, direct benefit of not just chucking and disposing it. And all the mayors and all the councils just say, pack it in, stop chucking it, please. Leave just your footprints.
Look, someone taking the time and actually getting... I won't take that. Taking the time to get up on their hind legs and do something practical about an issue that touches all of our lives. It's definitely puts you in the category of a Great Britain for this week. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for your time and best of luck with the rest of the 11,000, 12,000 miles that you have to cover.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. It's just gone 7 o'clock. This is Neil Oliver live on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. There's lots more to come between now and 8 o'clock. We'll discuss the UK heatwave and the spectacular images harvested by NASA's James Webb Space Telescope. But first, here are the latest news headlines brought to you by Tatiana Sanchez.
I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Cabinet Office has chaired an emergency COBRA meeting as the UK could be hit with record high temperatures of 40 degrees next week. It's after the Met Office issued its first and highest red extreme heat alert for parts of England on Monday and on Tuesday, meaning the hot weather will be a possible threat to life. The UK Health Security Agency has declared a national emergency. Cabinet Minister Kit Malthouse is urging people to avoid unnecessary travel on the 2 hottest days.
It's the second COBRA meeting, and in between the two, obviously, the first red alert, heat alert in the country's history was issued, which meant that things had obviously worsened slightly. We expect the heat to last for 2 days, on Monday and Tuesday, when there's a possibility that records will be broken. But then later in the week, and certainly starting later on Tuesday, cooler air should start to come in from the southwest.
Meanwhile, in Europe, thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes as wildfires sweep across parts of Spain, France and Portugal. More than 1,000 firefighters have been battling fires all week long as officials issued health warnings for the heatwave. More than 12,000 residents have been evacuated in the southwest of France, with temperatures expected to hit over 40 degrees over the next few days. The final 5 Conservative leadership candidates have faced the first of 3 live televised debates clashing over tax cuts and gender politics. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak defended his economic policies, calling for Foreign Secretary Liz Truss's plans a fairy tale. Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch and International Trade Secretary Penny Mordaunt traded words over trans issues. Backbencher Tom Tugendhat said trust in the Tory party has been collapsing. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak says the Conservative candidates are all on the same side.
I've got enormous respect and admiration for all of my colleagues who are standing to be leader, and it's right that we have passionate debate about these issues. And when this election is over, we have to remember we're all part of the same Conservative team, the same Conservative family, and we're going to come together and serve the British people.
President Joe Biden says the US will remain an active and engaged partner in the Middle East. In his first visit to the region since becoming president, he held a summit with 6 Gulf states, plus Egypt, Jordan and Iraq. He also held talks with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which has drawn criticism in the US. Well, Biden had promised to make Saudi Arabia a pariah on the global stage over the murder of Washington Post journalist and Saudi Arabia critic Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Neil Oliver live.
Thanks for that, Tatiana. For no reason I can readily understand, the powers that be seem especially worried about warm weather in July. I'm old enough to remember the fabled summer of 76. High temperatures, droughts, empty reservoirs, plagues of ladybirds, cloudless skies for weeks on end. And it was fantastic. Best summer ever. Now the mercury is inching into the 30s once more, and the word from on high is that our very lives are in danger. The weather maps on TV, coloured darkest red, give the impression these islands are about to spontaneously combust at any moment. My next guest is weatherman and icon John Ketley, to give me a better understanding of how much danger we're actually in. Good evening, John. It's lovely to see you there. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Neil. But can I just say, first of all, you're still wearing your denim, so it can't be that hot yet.
Yes, exactly. I have to credit the air conditioning with some of my tolerances. However, what's going on, John? What is the reality of the weather that we're facing, and is it something from which we should be hiding?
Well, the first thing to say is that some of us can all be a little bit sceptical, but I've never seen weather charts looking as severe and serious as they have been over the past 5 days. I've been looking at
I think we might have lost John at the moment. Have we lost John? Okay. Emily, what are you making of the incessant fuss? I think John was going to say that there are legitimate causes for weather men and women to be raising an alarm, but what do you make of this in the context of a climate of fear?
Yes, I think he was about to say that it is actually quite bad, but I guess this is exciting stuff for weather people, like how the pandemic was very exciting for virologists and the public health lobby. It's something that you can get very excited about, but for most people, they just get on with it, think it's a bit hot, think it's a bit of a nightmare on the transport and so on, and they don't worry that they're going to die. Having said that, I'm sure for some elderly people and for babies and pregnant women, it may be intolerable, but that's why you go and buy a fan.
Absolutely.
Benjamin, as I understand it, something like 90% of deaths, weather-related deaths in this country, are to do with the cold. I don't think it's much over 1% are related to the heat. And we're getting so excited about a few days of hot weather, and yet the same media are watching politicians cheer through all sorts of ways in which heating homes in the winter to come is going to be made almost impossible for people. And so people are going to die of cold.
I think we should be grateful for the hot weather at the moment, because when winter comes and people can't pay their fuel bills, that's when they're going to really struggle from the weather. That's when people are actually going to start dying as a result of it. So, look, it's common sense. Carry a bottle of water if you have to go out, if it's really that hot. But look, it's this hot in other countries regularly. It's not. This is abnormal for the UK, but it's not abnormal for, say, Spain. Now, of course, their infrastructure is built around, managing hot weather and their houses and all the rest of it. They have air conditioning and fans. But it's not, it's not a climate crisis. It's not an emergency. We're not going to burst into flames. Let's get some perspective.
I think we've got John Ketley back on the line. Are you there, John? Welcome back. Isn't it the case, John, that people have for a generation and more been hopping on jet planes every chance they get to try and chase the kind of temperatures that we're being promised / threatened with this week? Why are we being encouraged to be fearful in the face of them here at home?
Well, you're absolutely right, Neil. Of course, people do enjoy, usually, hot summers. Hot summer weather. That's why they go off to the Mediterranean or whatever. And when they come back and it's raining in wherever in the country, it's disappointing. And maybe they don't see much warm sunshine again for the rest of the summer. But no, the truth of the matter is, at the moment, Neil, though we can all be a little bit sceptical, I was trying to say earlier on, this is actually unprecedented. I've never seen temperatures potentially as high as they've been in this country before. We've got to beat that record of 38.7, of course, which was set at Cambridge in 2019. And I think that record will be smashed, whatever that means. So we are in for 2-3 days of very hot weather, and we do have to be careful. But of course, we're not the nanny state, are we, Neil? And we can't blame climate change for everything. And we have seen these sort of conditions before, no doubt, centuries earlier.
What about the summer of 76 that I referred to? I mean, I was a little boy then, and I just remember a summer holiday from school where the sun shone every day. And I remember the satellite photograph of these islands, not a cloud in the sky and all that. And I only remember it being good, but then I was a child. How does what's being forecast at the moment compare to what was there in that famous summer?
Well, quite honestly, we're nowhere near it, are we? I mean, the temperatures are going to be higher than they were in that summer, but that summer did last for a long time, and it followed a very dry, warm summer in 75, then a dry winter and spring into 76. So it was unusual circumstances. Reservoir levels were already falling very quickly. There was a drought, generally speaking, across many parts of the country, and the hot weather kicked in at times during June, And it was through the end of June into July and most of August, actually nearly the whole of August, where it just kept on staying dry, it seemed, and lots of hot sunshine. And it was the hottest Wimbledon, for example, we'd ever seen. So it was an exceptional spell of weather for nearly 2 years. This is somewhat different. This is a short, sharp burst of 3 days of very, very hot weather, which in itself is dangerous. There's no question about that. It is dangerous. Now, we keep hearing these reports that we've never had this extreme red warning before. Well, of course you haven't. It was only introduced last year. There would have been one in 75, 76. There would have been one in 2003, 6. And there would have been one in 2018 when some places were 50 days without rain in the southwest. So these are not unprecedented situations. We've seen droughts, we've seen heat waves before, and this is only going to last in its initial burst for 3 days before the rain comes back in and everything goes a bit more normal. But who's to say it won't get warmer again after that? But I think, being a little bit more serious about it, it is exceptional. The temperatures will break records, and we could see them, up towards 41, maybe even 42. Who knows?
Wouldn't it be helpful to encourage people to look on the bright side, to coin a cliche in that context? That just to be aware. People have been told that it's going to be warm, and isn't it in many ways something to look forward to and to enjoy?
Well, you're right. You are right, of course. But the infrastructure in this country seems to break down at the drop of a hat. And we know that there are going to be problems if you're travelling anywhere around the country on Monday and Tuesday. We know that the trains will have to go slower than normal because of the risk of buckling of the rails. We know that cars will still break down, even though they're so much better built than they were in 75 and 76. Cars will break down. Everybody will be stretched. If you're out and about, then you could have longer journeys than you would have done normally. But these days we're always encouraged to work at home. So why not just do that? Stay at home in the shade if you want to. Have a drink and keep drinking water, potentially. Lots of water. But just try and enjoy it if you can. But work from home as well is a very good motto, I think, as far as the next 3 days are concerned. Because it'll soon be over and we'll all be fed up again once it starts to rain.
When our connection to you broke down, I was talking to my panel about more people, if many more people, orders of magnitude more people die in this country of the cold rather than of hot weather. What are the long range forecasts predicting, given the cost of living crisis and the fact that many people will be facing very difficult choices about how to heat their homes? What's the long range saying about the months to come?
Well, there's no long-range forecast from Shea Ketley, I have to say, because it's hard enough getting the next few days right, and I can only go about 16 days at a time. But logically, and if you're looking at climatology, you're going to get more good weather this summer, but you'll also get, without question, somebody who's booked holiday at some point in August or into early September is probably going to get a wet week. It's just the way things happen in this country. We can go back over decades, and we've seen sometimes the hottest day of the year has occurred on the 1st of October. That was about 1985, and 2011, a very hot start to October as well. So there's nothing really laid in stone as far as the climatology in this country is concerned. It'll always come back and bite you. Sometimes you can be lucky, sometimes you can be unlucky. But it's not a nanny state, as we say. I think we just got to enjoy it while it's there, but at the same time put up with heat or wet weather once that comes along as well.
John, I'm going to open this out to my panel again while I have you here, so bear with me. Benjamin, is it just part of a reliance that the powers that be have developed around keeping us anxious?
Yeah, fear is a great motivator. It's a greater motivator than love or anything else, really. So if you have something that you can scare people with, you can get them to do what you want them to do. So I do think there is some sense of this being weaponised so that, and like Emily was saying, also, it might not be so malicious. It might just be 15 minutes of fame for the people whose expertise this is, and they finally get.
I think that's a lot to do with it. Yeah. I mean, if you look at during the pandemic, there were these people, these scientists who probably before were just geeks and not known, and yes, very expert in their tiny little part of science. And then there's suddenly these media stars called onto every channel, everywhere, and so on and so on. Obviously, the weather is always of interest to Brits. So this stepping up of the red maps and everything like that is a bit much and is different to the past. I mean, there's those images that are going around social media comparing, the happy suns compared to the, as you said in your monologue, the doom and gloom, or what was it, an inferno.
But
is what it looks like.
John mentioned the fact that we haven't had red warnings before because they didn't exist, which begs the question, why do they exist?
But I think it's also the climate change, because the BBC sees its duty to educate us. And climate change is one of the ways they wish to do so. Same with Sky News, same with other media outlets. They want to educate us. So I think they're using these maps to tell us that if we don't stop behaving in the way that we currently are, we're destroying the planet. So I think there's fear in that way.
Do you think that's the case? Do you think are they laying the ground, sowing the seeds that they can harvest later on as reasons to, I don't know, lock us down for climate?
Well, perhaps. I think there's definitely a shift in the messaging and the way that things are presented. You can present something as very sunny, you know, a sun with a hat on, a big smiley face. It's a lot nicer than, you know, a burning up country and all in red. I mean, there's a big difference between the way that you message something. You can have the exact same situation, a hot summer, and you can present it as go to the beach, have fun, have an ice cream, take it easy. Or you can have it as, oh, you're burning up the world, you're all awful people, and it's your fault, and anthropogenic climate change is killing all of us or whatever else. It's all about perspective and messaging.
I think all we can hope for is that this winter isn't a particularly cold one with the gas prices. Something we can all hope for.
I think we've got John back again. Are you still with us there, John?
Yes, thank you, Neil.
What should we... I keep coming back to the fact that I'm more concerned, I think, on behalf of the majority of the population about the cold weather to come. Is it not the case, being realistic and practical here in this country, that a couple of days of hot weather there might be issues for babies and for people who are vulnerable in whatever way, but in reality, as a nation, it's the cold that we need to be prepared for, and not the odd day of fair weather.
Well, that possibly is true, but you know, we do know that there will be casualties in the next few days, but they may well have underlying issues anyway. We know all that. It's mainly people who are over 65, say, without putting on a medical hat. But yes, you say more problems in the winter with the cold, because the winter seems to go on for longer and it just gets very depressing, and you get long spells of cold weather in the winter. But we don't get very severe winters, generally speaking, these days. Every now and again we get hit by a strange quirk of nature, and we get that very, very cold December in 2010 came completely out of the blue. And if we had one of those, and there's no forecast for it, but if we had a really severe month in the middle of this coming winter, that would be atrocious, really. That would be awful for lots of people who can't afford to pay the bills. So we don't want that sort of thing. Let's just go down the middle of the road if we possibly can. Let's just stick to what we know best, if you like. Let's just have a boring, mundane winter where we might see a few snowflakes, no doubt some snow in the Scottish mountains. You'll probably see more than I will, Neil, down here in the south. But at the moment, there's no forecast going that way. So I think we just have to be grin and bear whatever comes.
One last question, John. You did mention that the red warnings hadn't previously existed. Why are they with us now, given that days like this are so rare? Why has there suddenly been a move to alarm people with maps painted deepest red?
Well, I think they are telling a story, but you're absolutely right. I mean, they should have been done donkeys years ago. Of course they should. We didn't have such technology to produce these sort of charts, I think, on television when I was doing it way back in the 80s, really. So we didn't do that sort of thing so much. And there was always a feeling that we were lecturing to people. It was almost becoming a university lecture if you started putting up sort of fancy probability charts and things like that. But I think these days, more often than not, people do appreciate it. It does get the message across to the media rather better than we used to be able to do. So on the whole, I'm keen to have these charts, but they should have been done many, many years ago, in my opinion.
Say, John, I long for the days when we weren't being lectured to by every other person from behind every other podium. But John Ketley, weatherman and national treasure, thank you so much for your time. I hope our paths cross again. Thanks for now. After the break, I'll find out why people are turning their backs on savings accounts and the stock market and investing in whiskey. That's becoming much more popular. I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Consider that while I'm gone.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. The state of our economy, courtesy of lockdown and the rest of our government's destructive policies, might reasonably drive a person to drink. More seriously, when it comes to making the most of earnings and savings in these increasingly challenging times, what's to be done for the best? More than a third no longer trust savings accounts. Volatile cryptocurrencies are in and out of favour, and a quarter of investors feel they can no longer rely on stocks and shares. In fact, more and more Brits are abandoning traditional investments and turning instead to the potential of vintage whisky. My next guests, Sam Brooks and Mike Webb from Vintage Acquisitions, join me now to explain why the water of life, Ushkaba, is attracting more and more interest. Mike, why whisky? What's the point? What's the value?
Well, it really makes common sense. We're in a world now where inflation's 9.1%, interest rates are on the up, and the last time this happened was sort of in the 80s when we had hyperinflation. And at that time, it was just the super rich that had access to commodities like oil, gold, fine art, antiques, cars, and that's really inaccessible for ordinary Joe public. And what we've done over the last sort of 12 years is put time and money into whisky. And it's a very simple proposition. It's not linked to indices. It's not attached to markets. Quite simply, the older it is, the more valuable it is. So the earlier you buy it, the better.
Doesn't whisky stay the same age that it goes into the barrel or into the bottle?
Correct, yeah, that's absolutely correct. So what happens is whisky only matures whilst it's in the wood, whilst it's in the cask. Once it's bottled, it stays that same age.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So are people, in this instance, investing in barrels, not bottles?
Correct, yeah.
And what kind of money are we talking about here? You know, how big is the market now in people investing this way?
The market's huge, absolutely huge. So we're in our 11th year of trading, and we're bringing on more and more people now because we're making it accessible to everybody on the street. It only used to be accessible to people who had friends or family at distilleries or worked there themselves. But now we're able to access casks from the majority of distilleries, either directly or indirectly. And people can invest from as little as around about sort of £2,500 up to sky's the limit.
You said it was a simple proposition, Mike. I take it that wherever the barrel is, the barrel stays.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our job, if you like, is to act as a client's duty representative. Mm-hmm. So we have all the relevant HMRC licences that allow us to do that.
So effectively, and a lot of our clients are new to cask whisky purchase. They're just fed up with what's happening with their savings. They want to try something different. We also have a lot of parents and grandparents that buy for their children and grandchildren, because clearly it's a long-term strategy. So effectively, we've tried to make the process as simple as possible. So Sam will talk more about the care of the cask, because he's the real whisky man. But essentially, you buy a cask, it's stored under bond at a HMRC licensed facility in Scotland. We get it checked regularly to make sure the ABV and the amount of alcohol is as it should be. And it's got a couple of major advantages. With my IFA background, the main advantage is there's no capital gains tax payable on the profit.
So when you come to sell,
yes,
you're not taxed on the value, right?
Correct.
So talk me through that. Mike was saying that that you're the whisky man.
Yeah.
So what is the system and what is the attraction?
So the attraction is that people want something a little bit more exciting these days. They want to have a bit of fun. They don't just want a share certificate that could be worthless in a few years' time. They're purchasing something that's living and breathing. Whisky by its pure nature can't help but improve the longer it's held in the cask. OK, it's as simple as that. But the longer it's held in the cask, the rarer it becomes. So it's a simple investment methodology, and it just pushes the price up.
How valuable can whisky be?
So just last week, there was an auction for an Ardbeg 1975 cask of single malt whisky that sold for £16 million. To a...
One cask?
One cask.
How many bottles of whisky is that?
So it would have made 440 bottles, I believe, and without all the added costs on top, with dry goods and VAT and all the rest of it, would have been about £36,000 a bottle.
When was that a single owner that held that cask?
Yeah, it was an anonymous female collector from Asia.
And how long had it been in that owner's hand? How long had it taken for her investment to mature to that kind of level?
Well, it was a 1975 cask. It had been re-racked a couple of times. So basically it started its life, I think, in ex-bourbon, and then it got re-racked. So it got decanted into a sherry cask. And then, it had been at the distillery all that time. It was actually the distillery who sold it. It wasn't another individual. It was Ardbeg on Islay that sold it. So, and an interesting fact is that in 1997, Glenmorangie bought Ardbeg Distillery and all of its contents for half that amount.
So for $8 million, the whole thing,
Correct.
now a single cask is
Correct.
16 million.
Correct. Yeah.
Is this we're talking here specifically about vintage whisky, but I can only imagine that, say, vintage wine, and other beverages and spirits are all being traded in this way. Would that be the case?
Yeah, people want something tangible. They want something that, that they can touch, they can see, they can feel. With whisky, you can draw samples from the cask. Every year you can go and visit the cask, should you so wish. We've also got some other companies. We bottle our own whisky. We've got an events company called the Vintage Whisky Club. So we do distillery tour weekends, we do sporting events with all like-minded people that either like whisky or like investing into it. And they all get together and meet up, and it's a bit of fun.
Is the volatility that, say, in cryptocurrency, people get very excited around things like Bitcoin and Ethereum and whatever, which seem to rise and fall. Yeah. Is it less terrifying to be invested in something like a vintage whisky cask?
Yeah, I think the fact that it's not linked to markets makes it attractive. We don't see the fluctuations with whisky. We know. A very important statistic is when a whisky hits its 10th birthday, by that time 90% of that whisky has either been bottled or consumed, so that immediately gives it a desirability factor. And it's really a case of sticking with it and being in it for the long term. And that's why we've set up an online portal so clients can set up a username and password and view their cask sort of inventory and what they've purchased. And that also triggers the regauges, the cask MOTs every 3 to 5 years. And we use it interactively for the sporting events. We were at Lord's on Thursday, for example. with some clients, and also news. You know, if a particular client is after a particular cask and we get them into stock, then we can ping them non-invasively and they can respond.
Who makes the decision? I mean, I'm presuming that the casks sit and then eventually the distillery reaches a point where it wants to bottle that, it wants to fill bottles of whisky from that cask. What happens if the owner of the cask would rather it continued to mature and become older? You know, who has the final say on the destiny of the contents of the cask?
Good question. So all of our clients purchase their own cask. Okay, so it's their property. They can do with it as they please.
You always own the whole content. You don't buy half a cask.
No. It's always the whole cask or a number of casks, and then it's up to them what they do with it. They're the legal owner,
right?
So they could bottle it if they want to. They could sell it. They could auction the cask. There's lots of different flexible options.
So I suppose potentially the distiller who's holding the cask it might be in their interests to acquire that cask if it's got to the point where it could be tens of thousands of pounds worth per bottle.
You're absolutely right. Depending on how rare the cask is at point of sale, there's sometimes an option to sell it back to the distillery where it was produced.
What is the most? What's the Rolls Royce at the moment? What's the most desirable cask of whisky anywhere on the planet?
Well, it's difficult because, I mean, all the records were broken with a cask of Macallan that sold recently for £1 million. A guy purchased it for £5,000 30 years ago, forgot he had it, got contacted by Macallan to say, oh, we've got this cask, you know, what do you want to do with it? He put it on an auction and it sold for 1.1 million, I think, in the end, didn't it?
Yeah.
Over 30 years. So we've always thought that Macallan really is sort of the highest priced whiskey out there. However, this Ardbeg has just blown that out of the water.
Yeah.
So we were all stunned. I mean, we all had to pick our jaws off the floor really when the news was announced.
It's a fascinating prospect, I have to say. I love when when I'm invited to contemplate something I hadn't thought about before, and the idea of owning a cask of whiskey that's just sitting somewhere in the dark, becoming potentially more and more valuable.
Well, this is it. We can't speed up, like you said, with the cryptocurrency. You know, we're not going to make you a billionaire overnight like can happen in the cryptocurrency, but you also won't lose your money overnight.
Yeah.
It's a steady growth. We can't speed up the maturation process that happens inside the cask. So as long as you've got sort of a minimum term of sort of 5 years we always look at, but the longer the better, then it could be ideal for you.
And holding on to something real. As you say, it's not flickering digits on a computer screen. You can go and visit your cask of Ardbeg or Macallan or whatever.
Yeah, and draw samples every year. You know, that's really interesting because you get to see the change in the colour, the characteristics of the whiskey right the way throughout its life cycle. Get to share it with your family at Christmas. Oh, this is my cask, you know, what do you think of it? It's great. Do you like a dram, Neil?
I do.
Yeah?
It's not been unknown.
Good man.
You haven't brought some, have you?
Well, you're in good company here.
Mike and Sam, it's been great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Really good. Really interesting idea.
Nice to meet you.
Bear with me. Just, we've all heard the idea that the beating of one butterfly's wings on one side of the world might cause or avert a hurricane 10,000 miles away. It's an illustration of how we're all connected, that all actions, even those that seem inconsequential, have consequences great and small. Well, now it's the butterflies themselves that are subject to the consequences of the way we treat their habitats in the countryside and in the towns and cities. Half of Britain's butterfly species are now threatened with extinction, and last year's national butterfly count found the lowest ever number. Joining me now to contemplate a world in which fewer butterfly wings are beating is butterfly conservation's Dr. Zoe Randall. Hello, Dr. Zoe.
Hi, good evening.
This is no small survey that was carried out. How bad is the situation? What have we learned?
Well, we got the Big Butterfly Count has started running for this year, and last year over 100,000 people took part. They did over 151,000 counts. And what we found is that last year was the 12th year, in the 12 years of the survey, more and more people were out counting butterflies. but fewer butterflies were around for them to count. So we're hoping that this year, numbers may go up. People might see more. We've got to remember that this is just a snapshot. The big butterfly count runs for 3 weeks every year, and it's very determined. The numbers that you'll see are very determined by the weather conditions at the time, and what the spring weather was like, and what the winter weather was like, because all of that can affect the numbers of butterflies that you're going to see the following season. And but obviously at the moment, we had a warmish spring, and then May was very wet, and now it's going to be boiling hot. So it's really to see how our extreme weather is affecting butterflies. And like I said, this is just a snapshot, but we've got long-term data going back to 1976, which shows that 3/4 of our butterflies are declining either in the numbers and or their distribution, so where they're found.
In reading around this subject before talking to you, I came across the statement that butterflies and moths are regarded as indicators of the health of our environment. Canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. Why is that the case? Why do we get that kind of generalised information about the health of the environment from butterflies and moths?
Well, there's a long tradition of studying butterflies and moths in the UK, over 300 or 400 years worth. And they are indicator species because they've got short life cycles. So they're very sensitive to environmental change. And so they can, reflect what's going on in the wider environment. And because they're so well studied, we can use them as like an umbrella species and a barometer to what's happening with other species in the countryside as well. And with our butterflies, and our moths, we can see that many of them are moving further north as a result of climate change. It's warmer for them further north, so they can move further north, which is great if you're a warm adapted species. But if you're a cooler adapted species, for example, the Scotch Argus, which, as the name suggests, is only really found in Scotland now. The English colonies are pretty much gone because it's got too warm and the butterflies moved northwards. So there's only so far north the butterflies can go because Scotland runs out. They'll be paddling. So,
How many butterfly and moth species do we have? And how many of those have we lost to extinction? Since records and observations began.
So we've got 2,500 species of moth in the UK. About 60 of those went extinct in the last century, and we've got 59 butterflies in the UK, and I think we've lost about half a dozen or so over the last 100 years or so. But we've had some really good, it's not all doom and gloom though, we've had some really good conservation success stories with, for example, the large blue butterfly, which went extinct in 1979. And we did, scientists did a sort of experiment to see if they could reintroduce it from stock from Sweden. And they ran this experiment, managed the land to ensure that the ant was there, that the caterpillars needed. We sprinkled the caterpillars on the land, and fortunately it all went really well. The habitat management was really good. The ants are there, and the butterflies now are absolutely thriving. So they're not our initial sort of British race of large blues, but they are surviving. We've done a really good job of conserving those.
Zoe, bear with me while I bring in my panel guests here on this subject. Emily, a Britain without butterflies is unthinkable, surely.
It'll be very sad. I was just in Italy, in Chianti, near Florence. Not Provence, that's France. Near Florence, and there were beautiful butterflies everywhere. Mm-hmm. When you looked at the flowers and in the vineyards, butterflies absolutely everywhere, and they are gorgeous creatures. I didn't realise they declined in numbers by so much. Which is rather sad. They are very, very beautiful creatures. I didn't know about the role that they play, their broader role in the environment, but sad just from an aesthetic point of view.
They're almost synonymous to me somehow with childhood. I think children, surely especially, are captivated by the unique flight of butterflies and moths. to contemplate a world lacking that kind of magic is unthinkable.
I do remember at childhood whenever a butterfly came into the garden, we'd all sort of chase after, oh, butterfly, butterfly. It was really exciting. It was like a moment. And they are like flying flowers, aren't they? They're just gorgeous.
We used to have nets, didn't people used to?
Yeah, people used to go catching them.
It's probably not very good for them, is it?
Probably why they're going extinct.
There was that butterfly house. Is it in Kew in South West London?
Kew Gardens.
The Kew Gardens, and there's that butterfly room, or is it London Zoo? I don't know, but extraordinary. These massive butterflies.
Amazing. Yeah. And they do get so big. The ones we get in the UK are quite small, but there are some massive ones around.
Zoe, are there any simple things that we could be doing? You know, those of us that have gardens, for example. You know, are there plants or are there behaviours and ways of looking after our lawns and plants that would make life easier for the species that we still have?
Absolutely. I mean, particularly in urban areas, because butterflies in urban areas, we know that they are declining quicker in urban areas compared to the countryside. So the one thing you can do is you can plant lots of nectar. So you've got and have a source of nectar, lots of different nectar sources growing throughout the season. So there's nectar available for them to eat from spring all the way through to autumn. The other thing you can do is grow caterpillar food plants, so that the butterflies have got food plants on which to lay their eggs, so that then the caterpillars have got something to feed on, and then they can grow and disperse. You need some longer areas of vegetation in your garden, so that the soil temperature is cooler and they've got places they can go and shelter. That's particularly important, you know, like now with this hot spell that's coming up. Because butterflies like us, when it gets like super hot, they will go and, you know, check out and find somewhere cooler to hang out. Artificial grass is an absolute no-no. I mean, it's sterile, it's barren. To me, it suffocates the soil. It completely suffocates the ground. So no artificial grass. Peat-free compost is another one, because there are lots of creatures that live on the peat bogs which are exploited for the peat-based compost, so no peat-based compost. And just think about your wider actions as well. You know, you mentioned earlier about the flap of a butterfly's wings. You know, everything is connected. And to me, it's like every decision, every action you take has a reaction. So just think about your individual actions as well and what the wider ramifications of those things are. And also do the big butterfly count. Get out there, count some butterflies in your garden, your local park, wherever. Enjoy them, love them. You know, they're beautiful, they're iconic, and they're really good to watch and study, you know, to keep your mental health in balance as well, particularly in challenging times.
I couldn't agree more, Dr. Zoe Randall. The very thought of a garden without the occasional butterfly, I think anyone of any age, just the glimpse of a butterfly is a little bit of magic in our daily lives, and the thought, the reminder that the butterflies are at threat. It should make us all pay a bit more attention. Thank you for bringing that very important idea to us this evening, Dr. Zoe Randall. After the break, I'll discuss those remarkable images from NASA's James Webb Space Telescope. Coming up, see you shortly.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, it's time to flush away hellish unisex toilets. In The Big Question, is Britain facing a dental health crisis? We meet dentist to the stars Richard Marx, a man responsible for the smiles of Tom Daley, Christine Lampard and Rylan. In My Take at 10, yes, it's hot, but stop treating us like children. My all-star panel features radio legend Mike Porky Parry, plus the latest on a new book about Meghan Markle, with the Queen of US Royal Reporting, Kinsey Schofield. See you at 9.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. The first images from a £7 billion space telescope were released by NASA last week. Among a range of genuinely mind-blowing pictures, one showing thousands of galaxies in a patch of sky no bigger than a grain of sand held at arm's length. A glimpse back in time to 4.6 billion years ago, when our planet was in the process of being born. Space expert Andrew Lound joins me now to help us get our heads around exactly what we're looking at. Good evening, Andrew.
Hello, Neil. Thank you for having me again.
Oh no, it's always a treat. I love these items. I wish I was a space expert. These photos that obviously got a lot of play in the press and elsewhere. Are they what most of us understand as photos, or is there a more complicated process that's actually involved here?
Yeah, there is a more complicated process involved. Most people are familiar with digital imagery. I think that's a better way to put it. And the digital imagery you're getting here is actually in the infrared part of the spectrum, because the objects that we want to look at with the Webb telescope are so far away in most cases that due to Doppler shift of the light is shifted into the infrared, which means you can't actually see them using normal white light sensors and things like that. Very similar to when a police car with its siren on goes past you, you hear the tone change. That's a Doppler shift. And that happens with light. So you need to have it as an infrared sensor. And the infrared sensors then take the images in various parts of the infrared, and that then processes a digital image of what we can actually see.
So are we being shown what the image would have looked like 4.6 billion years ago?
Yeah, I mean,
so it's not a fiction. We're not being shown a fiction.
No, we're not. What's exciting about this is the deep field image, which you referred to. The central portion of that, where you see the galaxies, which is a galaxy cluster in the constellation of Volans, is 4.6 billion light years away. And what we're picking up there is the infrared light from that, which left that area 4.6 billion years ago. So that's exactly what we're looking at. But the very exciting piece about this is if you look around it, you see thousands and thousands of other galaxies. And also you see some distortions. And that's because the gravity field created by all this massive galaxies acts as a lens. And therefore, it actually enables you to see further back in time using that massive gravity as a lens. And so far back, in fact, that one of the objects there, which is a scene, light left that object 13.1 billion years ago. We think the universe is 13.8 billion years old. So we're looking so far back in time, it's absolutely astounding. And the beauty of the infrared, of course, we can see details which you can't see in white light.
So these say a galaxy that we're catching a glimpse of there, does it no longer exist? Are we seeing a ghost of a galaxy?
That's a great question, and the answer is we simply don't know. It's quite likely, looking at some of the nearby galaxies that we see, that they have certainly incredibly long life cycles. And one of the reasons we're going back in time and looking at different sections of time as we look back is to see the evolution of galaxies and see how they end up. And therefore, yes, we could simply be seeing the ghost of something that no longer exists. That's certainly true of some stars that we look at. We're looking at stars which are probably already dead, but we're waiting for the light to actually reach us from that explosion, which sometimes happen, which is why we study supernova. And one of the images, you actually can see 5 galaxies together. It's called Stephan's Quintet. And these galaxies are gravitationally tied to each other in what they used to call a celestial dance. But as one is trying to fight away from each other, one's trying to pull you together, it's more like a cosmic tango, really. And eventually these will merge together to form a larger galaxy. And that's part of the evolution, because that's happening. That's going to happen to us. We're going to eventually merge in 4.5 billion years' time with Andromeda Galaxy. And therefore, we're trying to understand the mechanics of that.
Presumably, what you're describing, that the galaxies are coming together, that may well have happened, but it's going to take another several billions of years for the light emanating from that coming together to reach us, because we're way behind the story.
Yes, in Stephan's Quintet, it's 300 million years ago we're looking at. By now, physically now, several of those galaxies are probably closer to each other and more dramatic things have happened. So we are always looking back in time. We never see the universe as it is. We never see anything as it is. Even when you look at somebody in the street, you're actually seeing them in a minute fraction of a second as they were. And that is the nature of it. I mean, it's the same as why we get time delays on signals that we send out, radio waves. It's because they're travelling at the speed of light and it takes time to get there.
But Benjamin Loughnane, these concepts, they mess with our humble heads, don't they, these ideas?
Oh, it's incredible. There's another Chesterton quote, which is about the scientist and the poet. The scientist tries to fit the heavens into his head. The poet just tries to fit his head into the heavens. And I think we see those pictures, it's enough to not necessarily understand it, but just to think how beautiful it is.
From butterflies to galaxies 4.6 billion years ago, it's worth being reminded of the limitless, astonishing beauty of it all.
It's also a bit of a cure for narcissism, I guess. We all just feel rather insignificant when we talk about 4.6 billion years ago and the vast nature of space.
Yes. Andrew, are these amongst the best of the kind for you, given that we're reaching further back in time and further away all the time?
Yeah, I mean, this is just the beginning. This is almost, to put it into perspective of history, this is almost like it's 1610 again, and Galileo was first took his telescope at the sky and said,
Andrew Loughnane, I'm going to have to nip in there. I'm just going to run out of time on you because we could talk about this for an eternity. Thank you, Andrew Loughnane. That's all from me on Neil Oliver Live. My thanks, as always, to my panel this week, Emily Carver, Benjamin Loughnane, all my guests. I will be back at 6 o'clock next Saturday. Next up, it's Ministry of Offence.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy in the north with outbreaks of rain, drier and brighter in the south. Let's take a look at the details. After a warm night, it will be a fine start across southwest England with plenty of sunshine, though the sunshine may turn hazy at times as high clouds build in. A warm and sunny start for the southeast of England and the London area. Winds will remain light and temperatures will steadily climb through the morning. Plenty of warm sunshine across Wales with mostly high-based cloud around. Winds will be mostly light, though some stronger gusts for north at Pembrokeshire. It will be a cloudy start across northwest England with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle at first. This will clear eastwards through the morning, allowing for some bright or sunny spells later. Generally cloudy at first for much of northeast England with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle spreading in from the west. However, there will be bright or sunny spells around also tomorrow morning. Mainly cloudy for southern Scotland with spells of rain and drizzle. This will clear away during the morning to bright or sunny spells for many, but will continue further north. It will be dry across Northern Ireland by tomorrow morning with plenty of sunny spells, but there will be some high-based cloud around, making the sunshine hazy at times. Rain clearing much of the north with sunny spells in the south, temperatures rising readily across